When we write reviews, it can be tough to include the special little things that make a game great. There are only so many words to go around, and the main objective is always a qualitative assessment rather than an exhaustive analysis. Not helping things is the fact that the march of new games never stops, requiring us to move on. This is an attempt to fix that, to dig deeper than we usually can. Dark Souls 2 is less than a week away, and we wanted to highlight what made the original so captivating. With a game as complex as this, we can't cover everything, but we'll hopefully shed light on aspects that don't receive much attention. Very rarely do weapons have a physical presence in games. More often than not, combat becomes a math problem. Just keep killing things until you find a weapon with a bigger number. While damage is obviously an important consideration in Dark Souls, it's far from the only thing that matters. Weapons all have different animations, which can change their usefulness depending on the situation. You may pick a spear over a more powerful great axe simply because you're entering an area with a bunch of narrow corridors, and a wide swing just won't cut it. Paying attention to every aspect of a weapon often means the difference between life and death. There's another, less tangible quality about the weapons in Dark Souls. You may not like a weapon for a variety of strange reasons, regardless of its stats. Maybe you don't care for its parry animation, or that extra strike its strong attack has. So many players fall in love with halberds or greatswords for no other reason than they just click. The way a weapon feels matters, lending the fights in Dark Souls a unique level of intimacy that makes combat in other games seem impersonal by comparison. It's pretty weird when heroes like Simon Belmont find roasted chickens in crusty castle walls, but it's so common we don't even question it. We'll gladly destroy whatever's around us with the expectation of reward.
But there's no salvation here.
Not so in Dark Souls, at least not usually. Break all of the barrels and boxes you want, there are no treats to find. Items are generally earned in very specific ways. Make that leap of faith or cut off a monster's tail. Sometimes finding even the most basic items feels meaningful because of the amount of effort required. People joke that modern games pat players on the back for pressing the start button, but it's a joke that has a lot of truth in it. Games don't need to be difficult for the sake of it, but Dark Souls proves that rewards should only come after actually doing something worth rewarding.
I await good tidings.
There's one specific, easily overlooked area in Dark Souls where the greatest enemies in the game exist. They go by the name Frog Ray, and as implied are a glorious mix between a frog and a manta ray. These majestic red and black spotted wonders are hilariously weird. Featuring wide circular frames, they waddle toward players using their stumpy legs and attack with long elastic tongues. There is seemingly no reason for them to exist, and they're never encountered outside of this area. Frog Rays aren't challenging, and they don't drop anything particularly valuable, but they somehow feel essential to Dark Souls. Other games have the undead, dragons, and giants, but none of them have Frog Rays. Enemies usually act as a gate leading to something else. Maybe they're blocking the way forward, or perhaps they're holding a piece of gear you so desperately need. Very, very rarely is the pleasure of discovering a creature the only reason it's there. Frog Rays may not have as much of an impact as other aspects of Dark Souls, but we wouldn't want the game to exist without them. When people talk about Dark Souls, they bring up things like its difficulty, world design, and how obtuse it can be. The game's humor is almost never discussed. But Dark Souls is a deeply funny game. We're not just talking about amusing deaths or PvP shenanigans either. A lot of it is far more deliberate.
Hello!
Carvings serve as a great example. They consist of wooden orbs that, when thrown, produce a particular voiced phrase. Hearing the deep, disembodied voice of a giant cry, "Help me," is funny every time it happens. It's a dry, absurd sort of humor that wouldn't work in any other game.
I'm sorry.
Carvings also work because they catch you off guard. Getting invaded by another player is usually a tense experience where both players are waiting for the other to strike first. If one of them suddenly drops an "I'm sorry" carving at random, the mood of that moment instantly changes. Instead of a high-stress battle, it's a silly little comedic moment between two strangers. These odd tools allow for sporadic, organic moments that add so much.
I'm sorry.
Despite having finished Dark Souls multiple times, collecting every item and killing every enemy, we can't stop playing almost 3 years later. It's the little touches, like the ones mentioned above, that give the game a sort of gravitational pull. Dark Souls is one game that actually doesn't feel like it needs any more than what it already has, if only because there's simply nothing else like it.